My wife Rebecca slammed her Hermes purse on our marble kitchen counter so hard it made the crystal fruit bowl jump. Frank, sit down. We need to talk. The termination letter from Blackstone Industries was still burning in my jacket pocket, and apparently word travels fast in upper-class circles. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button. I'd been expecting this conversation since the moment security escorted me out of my corner office 3 hours ago. 26 years with the company, and they let me go because some 20-something MBA convinced them my department could be optimized with artificial intelligence. At 54, I was apparently too expensive to keep around. Rebecca, if this is about the job, it's about everything. She crossed her arms, designer nails drumming against her silk blouse. Frank, I've been thinking. Now that you're unemployed, things need to change around here. I poured myself a glass of water and sat down at our kitchen island, the same island where we'd shared coffee every morning for 18 years, where we'd planned vacations to Europe and discussed our dreams of early retirement. Funny how fast dreams can turn into negotiations. What kind of changes? Rebecca's voice took on that boardroom tone she used when discussing her family's real estate portfolio. From now on, we split everything 50-50. Bills, groceries, household expenses, everything. I'll only take care of my own needs. You'll handle yours. I almost choked on my water. Not from shock, mind you. From the effort it took not to laugh. See, Rebecca had never actually looked at our financial arrangements too closely. She'd inherited her money, never had to think about where it came from or how it worked. She just assumed her trust fund covered everything, while my salary handled the day-to-day expenses. 50-50, I repeated slowly. Including the mortgage, especially the mortgage and the utilities and the insurance, and the property taxes. She counted on her manicured fingers like she was explaining basic math to a child. The mortgage on this house that's in your name only? For just a second, uncertainty flickered across her face. But Rebecca had never backed down from anything in her life, and she wasn't starting now. That's irrelevant. You live here, you pay half. I leaned back in my chair and studied my wife of 18 years. Really looked at her. When had she become so cold? When had our marriage turned into a business arrangement? More importantly, when had she started seeing me as disposable? All right, I said simply. That wasn't the response she'd prepared for. Rebecca blinked twice, then straightened her shoulders. Good. I'm glad you're being reasonable about this. Oh, I'm being very reasonable. I stood up and headed toward my home office. In fact, I think this is exactly what we both need. Where are you going? I paused in the doorway and smiled, the first genuine smile I'd managed all day. To make some phone calls. If we're splitting everything 50-50, there are a few arrangements I need to make. Rebecca nodded, satisfied that she'd won this round. Poor woman had no idea that in 18 years of marriage, she'd never once actually won anything from me. I'd simply let her think she had. As I closed the office door behind me, I could hear her already on the phone with her sister Jennifer, probably bragging about how she'd put her unemployed husband in his place. She was about to learn that sometimes the most dangerous opponent is the one who says all right when you expect them to fight. The next morning, I watched Rebecca pour her usual organic fair trade coffee into her favorite mug, while I made instant coffee from the jar I'd picked up at the gas station. She wrinkled her nose but didn't comment. After all, we were splitting expenses now, and premium coffee wasn't in my half of the budget. I'll need your share of the mortgage by Friday, she announced, not looking up from her phone. It's $3,200. Sounds fair. I opened my tablet and pulled up the document I'd been working on since our conversation yesterday. I printed out some information for you, just so we're both clear on how this 50-50 arrangement works. Rebecca glanced at the papers I'd placed beside her coffee cup, then did a double take. What is this? An itemized list of shared expenses. You know, for our new arrangement. I sipped my terrible instant coffee and maintained eye contact. The mortgage you mentioned is $3,200. Property taxes, another $1,800 monthly. Homeowner's insurance, $450. Then we've got utilities, landscaping, pool maintenance, security system, house cleaning service. She was scanning the list, her frown deepening with each line item. The total comes to about $7,400 a month. Your half is $3,700. I pulled out my checkbook with a flourish. I can write you a check right now. Wait, there's a mistake. Some of these things are my responsibility. Which ones? I asked innocently. According to you yesterday, we're splitting everything 50-50. I assumed that meant everything. Rebecca's phone buzzed. She glanced at it and her face went pale. The cleaning lady wants to know if she should put today's charges on your card or mine. Yours, I suppose. I canceled our joint account this morning. I finished my coffee and stood up. Don't worry, though, I calculated your half of groceries, and there's enough food in the house for about 3 days if we split it down the middle. Frank, you can't be serious. Dead serious. In fact, I think this arrangement is going to work out perfectly. I headed toward the garage. I'm going out for a while. Job hunting, you understand. Oh, and the cable company will be here this afternoon to split the service. I figured you'd want your own account. Split the cable service. We can't share one account if we're splitting everything 50-50, can we? That wouldn't be fair to you. I grabbed my keys from the hook. They'll need to install a separate box for your side of the house. My side of the house? I paused at the door, enjoying the confusion spreading across her face. Well, we can't both use the master bedroom if we're only paying for half the house each. I measured it out this morning. The west wing is yours, the east wing is mine. Common areas we'll have to work out a schedule for. Rebecca stood up so fast her chair nearly tipped over. This is ridiculous. You're being petty. I'm being exactly what you asked me to be. I opened the garage door and looked back at my wife. 50-50, remember? Your words, not mine. As I backed out of the driveway, I could see Rebecca through the kitchen window, frantically scrolling through her phone, probably calling her sister Jennifer again. Or maybe her father's lawyer. Let her call whoever she wanted. I had my own calls to make. The first one was to my buddy Mike Thompson, who ran a small but successful accounting firm downtown. Mike and I had served together in the Army Reserve 20 years ago, and he'd been trying to recruit me away from corporate life for years. Frank, heard about Blackstone. They're lost, buddy. Thanks, Mike. Listen, is that offer still open? The one about becoming a partner? Are you kidding? I've been waiting for you to come to your senses for 5 years. When can you start? How about Monday? The second call was to my lawyer, Bill Henderson. Bill had handled our estate planning when Rebecca and I got married, so he was familiar with our unique financial situation. Bill, I need to review some documents, specifically the prenup. The prenup that Rebecca insisted wasn't necessary because you two were soulmates. Bill chuckled. The one she never actually signed. That's the one. Frank, what's she done now? I explained Rebecca's new 50-50 policy. While Bill laughed so hard I thought he might choke. She wants to split everything down the middle? Everything. Including the house that's in her name only, and the trust fund she inherited, and the investment properties she bought before you got married? She seems to think splitting means I pay half of her expenses while keeping my own income separate. Oh, Frank, she has no idea, does she? The third call was the most important one. I dialed a number I hadn't used in 6 months, but I knew she'd answer. Margaret? It's Frank Mitchell. I was wondering if that guest house behind your shop is still available for rent. Margaret Crenshaw owned a small bookstore in the historic district downtown. We'd been friends since she hired me to fix her computer system 2 years ago, and we'd developed one of those rare, genuine friendships that happens when you meet someone who actually gets your sense of humor. She was a widow in her 70s with no children, and had told me once that I reminded her of the son she'd always hoped to have. Frank, of course it's available. But aren't you still married to that charming woman who tried to return a book because it had too many sad parts? About that, I told Margaret the whole story while driving through downtown. By the time I finished, she was laughing so hard I could hear her snorting through the phone. She said 50-50? On everything? Everything. And you said all right? I said all right. Frank Mitchell, you beautiful, devious man. The guest house is yours rent-free until you get this sorted out. It's been empty for 6 months anyway since my last tenant moved out. I can't wait to watch this unfold. By the time I got home that evening, Rebecca was waiting in the driveway with a very expensive-looking woman in a very expensive-looking suit. Frank, this is Patricia Blackwell from Blackwell, Sterling & Associates. Rebecca's voice had that fake sweetness she used when she was about to drop a bomb. She's here to discuss our new living arrangements. I shook Patricia's hand and smiled. Nice to meet you. I hope you explained to Mrs. Mitchell that we don't have a prenup. Patricia's confident expression wavered slightly. I'm sorry, what? No prenup. All marital property is split 50-50 in case of divorce. I looked at Rebecca, whose face had gone completely white. But I'm sure she mentioned that, right? That night, Patricia Blackwell left without saying another word about living arrangements. And Rebecca didn't mention splitting anything 50-50. But I wasn't done. Not even close. Thursday morning, Rebecca was already gone when I woke up. Her side of the bed hadn't been slept in and her Mercedes wasn't in the garage. I found a note on the kitchen counter written on her monogram stationery. Staying at Jennifer's until we can work this out like adults. R. I poured myself a real cup of coffee from the bag of premium beans I'd hidden in my office and smiled. Rebecca always ran to her sister when things got complicated. Jennifer lived in a McMansion across town with her investment banker husband, and they'd probably spent all night analyzing my financial situation, trying to figure out how I could afford to split everything 50-50. They were asking the wrong questions. My phone rang while I was enjoying the rare silence of our house without Rebecca's morning routine of conference calls and blow-dryer sessions. Frank? It was Margaret Crenshaw. I hate to bother you, but there's a woman here asking questions about you. Says she's a private investigator. I almost dropped my coffee. Rebecca was moving faster than I'd expected. What kind of questions? Employment history, financial situation, whether you've been acting strangely lately. I told her you seemed perfectly normal to me, but then again, normal for you includes reprogramming my register to play jazz music, so my standards might be questionable. Margaret, you're a treasure. What did she look like? Professional, expensive handbag, the kind of person who probably irons her jeans. Rebecca's type exactly. Thanks for the heads up, I owe you dinner. You owe me a lot more than dinner if this gets interesting. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen and considered my next move. Rebecca was hiring investigators, which meant she was either planning divorce proceedings or trying to find evidence that I was hiding money somewhere. Both possibilities worked in my favor, but I needed to accelerate my timeline. I called Bill Henderson again. Bill, how quickly can we liquidate some assets? What kind of assets? And why the rush? Remember that consulting business I incorporated 5 years ago? The one I started informally about 6 years ago for freelance work on weekends? Mitchell Technology Solutions. Yeah, I remember. Why? Rebecca never knew about it. All the income went into a separate business account, and I never claimed any of it as marital property because I was planning to surprise her with a vacation to Europe for our 20th anniversary. Bill was quiet for a moment. Frank, how much money are we talking about? About $250,000, plus some stock options that matured last month. Jesus, she really doesn't know? Rebecca never paid attention to my weekend projects. She assumed I was just fixing computers for neighbors. I pulled out the financial statements I'd been reviewing all week. The consulting work grew into something bigger, and some of my clients became major accounts, but I kept it quiet because I wanted it to be a surprise. I even used a P.O. box for all the business correspondence so the statements wouldn't come to the house. Filed all the taxes separately under the business, completely above board. And now I'm 54 years old, unemployed, and my wife wants to split everything 50-50 while keeping her trust fund off the table. I think it's time for some surprises. That afternoon, I did something I'd never done in 18 years of marriage. I went shopping for clothes without Rebecca's input. The saleswoman at Nordstrom looked me up and down when I walked in wearing my standard khakis and polo shirt. Can I help you find something? I need a complete wardrobe. Business casual, some formal wear, maybe something more contemporary. I'm starting a new job and apparently need to update my image. What's your budget? I thought about the quarterly consulting payment that had hit my business account yesterday. Let's say $5,000 to start. Her attitude changed immediately. Right this way, sir. 2 hours later, I walked out with enough clothes to stock a small boutique and a new appreciation for how much confidence comes from wearing things that actually fit properly. My next stop was the BMW dealership. Looking for anything specific? The salesman asked, eyeing my shopping bags with interest. Something reliable. Pre-owned is fine, but I want something that'll last. Any particular model? I pointed to a silver 5 Series on the lot. That one looks good. Excellent choice. Are you trading anything in? No trade. I'll finance it, but I want to put down a substantial down payment. The salesman smiled. I can work with that. 45 minutes later, I was driving home in a car that cost more than Rebecca spent on shoes in a year. Not because I needed to prove anything, but because I could afford the payments and I'd been driving the same Honda Accord for 8 years. I pulled into our driveway just as Rebecca's Mercedes turned the corner. She parked behind me and stared through her windshield at my new car for a full minute before getting out. Frank? Whose car's that? Mine. I gathered my shopping bags and headed for the front door. Yours? Where did you get the money? I paused with my key in the lock. Rebecca, we've been splitting everything 50-50 for 3 whole days. Did you think I was going to sit in the corner and count pennies? But you lost your job. I lost one job. I opened the door and smiled at her over my shoulder. Fortunately, it wasn't my only source of income. I left her standing in the driveway, probably calling Jennifer again. 20 minutes later, she burst into my office without knocking. Frank, I want to know where that money came from. I looked up from my laptop, where I was reviewing job offers from 3 companies that had already called after word spread about my availability. Amazing how fast news travels in certain circles. Which money? The car money, the clothes money, all of it. I leaned back in my chair and studied my wife's face. Really looked at her. When had she become someone who demanded answers she had no right to ask? Rebecca, you've made it very clear that we're splitting everything 50-50 going forward. My income is my business, just like your trust fund is yours. That's different. How? She opened her mouth to answer, then closed it. Because there was no good answer to that question, and we both knew it. I want to see our financial statements, she said finally. Which ones? You have your accounts. I have mine. I want to see all of them. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a folder. Here are all the statements for our joint accounts. As of yesterday, the balance is 0. I transferred my half to my personal account. Rebecca grabbed the folder and flipped through it, her face getting redder with each page. This is vindictive. This is 50-50. I stood up and gathered the job offer letters from my desk. Rebecca, you're 43 years old, and you've managed a trust fund for 18 years. Did you really think I didn't understand how money works? Now, if you'll excuse me, I have some business calls to make. Oh, and I'll be out late tonight. Margaret invited me to dinner. Margaret? The bookstore woman? The bookstore woman who's been a better friend to me in 2 years than most people I've known for decades. I headed for the door. Don't wait up. As I left the house, I could hear Rebecca on the phone again. This time, it wasn't Jennifer she was calling. I caught enough of the conversation to know she was talking to a divorce lawyer. Perfect. Everything was going exactly according to plan. Friday evening, I was sitting in Margaret's bookstore after hours, helping her inventory some estate sale purchases, when Rebecca called. Frank, we need to talk. We are talking. In person. This is important. I glanced at Margaret, who was pretending to organize shelves while obviously eavesdropping. She'd made popcorn earlier, claiming it was for the entertainment value of my situation. Where do you want to meet? Home. Our home. All right. I'll be there in an hour. Margaret looked up when I hung up. Think she's figured it out yet? Doubtful. Rebecca's never been good at seeing the big picture when she's emotional. I helped her move a box of hardcovers to the back room. My guess is she's either planning to make a deal or threaten me with divorce papers. Are you worried? I thought about that question while we finished up. Was I worried? No. Disappointed, maybe. Sad that our marriage had come to financial negotiations instead of honest conversation. But worried. Not even a little bit. Margaret, can I ask you something personal? Depends how personal. When your husband left you for his secretary 10 years ago, how did you know it was time to stop fighting for the marriage? She stopped stacking books and looked at me with those sharp blue eyes that never missed anything. When I realized I was fighting for something that had already died. I was just too stubborn to admit it. How long had it been dead? Probably 5 years before he left. Maybe longer. She brushed dust off a leather-bound copy of Dickens. The leaving was just the official announcement. Why? I think I've been having a funeral for my marriage and didn't realize it. Margaret nodded slowly. Rebecca's not the woman you married, is she? Or maybe she is, and I just never saw it clearly before. I grabbed my jacket from the chair. Either way, I'm done pretending we're something we're not. The drive home gave me time to think about what Rebecca might be planning. She'd had 3 days to consult with lawyers, investigators, and her family. 3 days to realize that our financial situation was more complicated than she'd assumed. 3 days to understand that her 50-50 ultimatum might not work out the way she'd intended. I found her waiting in the living room with a bottle of wine and what looked suspiciously like a prepared speech. She'd changed into the blue dress she wore when she wanted something important. Frank, I think we got off on the wrong foot this week. Did we? I know you're upset about losing your job, and maybe I was insensitive about the timing of our rearrangement. I sat down across from her, noting that she'd positioned herself in what negotiators call the power seat, back to the wall, facing the room, closest to the exit. Someone had been coaching her. Rebecca, Are you about to offer me a deal? She blinked, thrown off her script. I just think we should discuss this like mature adults. I'm listening. She poured herself a glass of wine with hands that shook slightly. Maybe 50-50 was too abrupt. Maybe we could work out something more gradual, such as, you could stay in the house while you look for work. I wouldn't charge you rent or utilities. In exchange, you could handle some of the maintenance and yard work. I almost laughed. She was offering to let me be the live-in handyman for my own marriage. What about the split expenses you mentioned? We could table that until you're employed again. How generous. Something in my tone made her lean forward. Frank, I'm trying to be reasonable here. No. You're trying to control the situation because you just figured out that 50-50 works both ways. I stood up and walked to the window overlooking our backyard. Tell me, what did the private investigator find? Rebecca's wine glass paused halfway to her lips. I don't know what you're talking about. The one asking questions about me at Margaret's bookstore. The one you hired to find out where I got the money for the car. I haven't hired anyone. I turned around and looked at her. Rebecca had always been a terrible liar. Her left eye twitched when she was being dishonest, and right now it was going like a strobe light. What did she find, Rebecca? Nothing. There was nothing to find. Exactly. I sat back down and met her eyes. Because I've never hidden anything from you. Every penny I've ever earned, every investment I've ever made, every business decision I've ever considered, I discussed all of it with you. The problem is, you never listened. That's not true. When was the last time you asked me about my work? Real work. Not just complaining about my hours or questioning why I had to travel. Rebecca opened her mouth, then closed it. When was the last time we had a conversation about anything that didn't involve your social calendar, your family, or your shopping plans? Frank, when was the last time you treated me like a partner instead of a convenient bank account? She set down her wine glass and stood up. You're being cruel. I'm being honest. I pulled out my phone and showed her a photo I'd taken at Margaret's bookstore earlier. It showed me laughing at something she'd said while we sorted through old books. This is what I look like when someone actually enjoys my company. Rebecca stared at the photo, and for a moment something flickered across her face. Regret, maybe. Or recognition. Margaret is just a friend, she said quietly. Yes, she is. The kind of friend who calls to warn me when private investigators are asking questions. The kind of friend who makes me laugh and listens when I talk, and doesn't make me feel like I'm constantly falling short of some impossible standard. I never made you feel, Rebecca, 3 days ago you told me we were splitting everything 50-50 because I lost my job. Not because I'd done anything wrong. Not because I'd failed to provide for our family. Not because I'd been irresponsible with money. You wanted to split everything because I became unemployed through no fault of my own. She sank back into her chair. What does that tell you about how you see our marriage? For the first time all week, Rebecca looked genuinely uncertain. Not angry, not calculating, not performing. Just uncertain. I don't know, she whispered. Well, I do. And that's why I said all right when you made your 50-50 proposal. What do you mean? I gathered my keys and jacket. I mean, it's time we both stopped pretending this marriage is something it isn't. As I headed for the door, Rebecca called after me. Where are you going? To Margaret's. She's making dinner, and she actually wants me there. I left Rebecca sitting in our living room, probably trying to figure out what had just happened. Tomorrow she'd call Jennifer again, or her lawyer, or maybe even her father. But tonight I was going to have dinner with someone who laughed at my jokes and didn't see my unemployment as a character flaw. It felt like the first honest thing I'd done in months. Monday morning I walked into Mike Thompson's accounting firm wearing one of my new suits and carrying a briefcase Margaret had found at an estate sale. The brass nameplate read F. Mitchell, CPA, a gift she'd had made over the weekend while I was moving my clothes to her guest house. Frank, look at you, all corporate and intimidating. Mike grinned and shook my hand. Ready to start making real money? I thought I was already making real money. Compared to what you'll earn as my partner, you were working for grocery money. Mike wasn't exaggerating. The accounting firm specialized in small businesses and mid-sized corporations, and he'd been handling more clients than one person could reasonably manage. My first week's earning potential was already higher than my monthly salary at Blackstone Industries. Your office is down the hall, Mike said, leading me through a surprisingly modern workspace. I had IT set up your computer system over the weekend. Hope you don't mind, but I may have oversold your technology skills to a few clients. How oversold? Well, there's a manufacturing company that thinks you're going to revolutionize their entire digital infrastructure. Mike, and a restaurant chain that believes you can create a custom inventory system that will save them millions. Mike! He stopped walking and turned around with a sheepish grin. Would it help if I mentioned they're paying us twice our normal rate? Despite everything that had happened in the past week, I found myself laughing. Real laughter. The kind that comes from genuine amusement, instead of polite obligation. Show me the client files. By lunch, I'd reviewed 6 new accounts and outlined solutions for all of them. By the end of the day, I'd scheduled consultations with 3 potential new clients. By week's end, I'd generated more revenue than I used to earn in 3 months. On Friday evening, I was working late when my cell phone rang. Rebecca's name appeared on the screen, but I almost didn't recognize her voice when I answered. Frank, I need to talk to you. We're talking. I mean really talk. Not fight, not negotiate. Just talk. I leaned back in my desk chair and looked out the window at downtown traffic. About what? About us. About what happened. About what I did wrong. That was not the conversation I'd been expecting. Where are you? Home? Our home. I've been sitting here for 3 hours trying to figure out when everything went so wrong. And what did you decide? That I don't know, and that scares me more than anything else. I glanced at the clock. Margaret was expecting me for dinner in an hour, but something in Rebecca's voice made me pause. I'll be there in 20 minutes. When I arrived, I found Rebecca sitting on our front porch steps wearing jeans and an old sweater I'd given her for Christmas 5 years ago. No makeup, no jewelry, hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She looked younger somehow, more like the woman I'd married. Hi, she said softly. Hi. I sat down beside her, not too close, but close enough to smell her shampoo, the same vanilla scent she'd used for years. I called Jennifer's private investigator off, she said without looking at me. I know. How did you know? Because Margaret said she stopped getting questions yesterday. Rebecca nodded slowly. I also called the lawyer and canceled our consultation. Why? She was quiet for so long I thought she might not answer. Finally, she turned to look at me, because I realized I hired them for all the wrong reasons. Which were, I thought you were trying to take advantage of me. I thought you were hiding money and planning to leave me with nothing. She pulled her knees up to her chest. I thought you were the enemy. And now? Now I think I was looking in a mirror. We sat in silence while the sun finished setting behind our neighborhood. 18 years of marriage, and I couldn't remember the last time we'd just sat together without talking about schedules or obligations or other people. Frank, can I ask you something? Sure. The consulting business. How long have you had it? 5 years officially? I started doing freelance work informally about 6 years ago, then incorporated it into a proper business 5 years ago when the clients became more serious. And you never told me? I considered how to answer that. The honest response would hurt her, but lies had gotten us into this mess. I tried to tell you, multiple times. But every time I brought up work, you changed the subject or found something more important to discuss. That's not true. Rebecca, last Christmas I started to tell you about a major contract I'd landed, and you interrupted to show me pictures of Jennifer's kitchen renovation. She flinched. On our anniversary 2 years ago, I mentioned wanting to surprise you with a trip to Europe, and you spent the next hour explaining why Europe was overrated compared to Jennifer's vacation to Napa. I didn't mean. And 3 weeks ago, I tried to tell you about getting laid off, but you were on a conference call with your book club about whether to read Jane Austen or Gillian Flynn. Rebecca buried her face in her hands. Oh, God. I stopped trying to share things with you because you stopped being interested in hearing them. I'm a terrible wife. You're a distracted wife. There's a difference. She looked up at me with tears in her eyes. Is it too late to fix this? That was the question I'd been avoiding all week. Was it too late? Could we rebuild something real from the wreckage of 18 years of polite indifference? I don't know, I said honestly. But you're willing to try? I thought about Margaret's guest house, where I'd been sleeping better than I had in months. I thought about my new job, where I felt appreciated and challenged for the first time in years. I thought about the conversation I'd planned to have with Rebecca about trial separation. What does trying look like to you? I don't know. Counseling, maybe? Real conversations? Actually listening when you talk? And the 50-50 split? Rebecca's face crumpled. Frank, I said that because I was scared. When I heard about your job, all I could think about was what would happen if you couldn't support us anymore. I panicked and said the first thing that came to mind. The first thing that came to mind was splitting expenses down the middle instead of working together to figure out a solution. I know how it sounds. It sounds like you see me as a financial arrangement instead of a partner. She started crying then, not the delicate tears she used when she wanted sympathy, but ugly, honest sobbing. You're right, you're completely right, and I hate that you're right. I handed her my handkerchief and waited for her to compose herself. Rebecca, I need you to understand something. I didn't say all right to your 50-50 proposal because I agreed with it. I said all right because it finally made you show me who you really think I am. And who do I think you are? Someone whose value is measured entirely by his ability to pay bills. She flinched again, but didn't argue. The question is whether that's who you want to be married to, or if you want to be married to me. What's the difference? The bill-paying guy lives here and handles his assigned responsibilities and keeps his mouth shut about everything else. I'm the guy who builds businesses and tells stories and wants to travel and plan surprises and occasionally needs emotional support when life gets complicated. Rebecca wiped her eyes and looked at me with something I hadn't seen in years. Attention. Real, focused attention. I want to be married to you, she said quietly, but I'm not sure I remember how. Neither do I. We sat there until the streetlights came on. Not talking, just existing in the same space without agenda or conflict. Frank, yeah? Will you come home? Not permanently, just, will you sleep here tonight? In our bed? No expectations, no pressure. Just, I miss you. I thought about Margaret's guest house, about the conversation I'd have to have with her about why I wouldn't be there for dinner, about whether one night at home would confuse the bigger picture of what Rebecca and I needed to figure out. Okay, I said finally. But tomorrow we start counseling. Real counseling, not some friend of Jennifer's who'll take your side. Agreed. And I'm keeping the consulting business. It's mine, and I'm not apologizing for building something successful without asking your permission first. I wouldn't ask you to. And if we're going to work on this marriage, then we work on it as equals. No more financial arrangements. No more splitting responsibilities like roommates. Either we're partners or we're not. Rebecca nodded, tears still streaming down her face. Okay. As we walked into the house together, I wondered if we were making progress or just postponing the inevitable, but for the first time in months, Rebecca was looking at me like she actually saw me. That felt like a place to start. Tuesday evening, Rebecca and I sat in Dr. Sarah Chen's office for our first counseling session. Rebecca had found her through actual research instead of social connections. A psychologist who specialized in marriage therapy and had no ties to anyone we knew. Before we begin, Dr. Chen said, I want to establish some ground rules. This is a safe space for both of you to express your feelings without judgment. That means no interrupting, no defending, and no preparing your rebuttal while the other person is talking. I glanced at Rebecca, who was gripping her purse like a life preserver. Frank, would you like to start by telling me why you're here? Because my wife told me we needed to split all our expenses 50-50 after I lost my job. And when I agreed to her terms, she realized she didn't actually want what she'd asked for. Dr. Chen made a note. And how did that make you feel? Like she'd finally shown me how she really sees our marriage. Which is a financial arrangement with occasional companionship. Rebecca shifted in her chair but didn't interrupt. Rebecca, how would you respond to that? Rebecca started, then stopped. I think he's right. And I hate that he's right. Tell me more about that. When Frank lost his job, the first thing I thought about was money. Not how he was feeling, not what kind of support he needed, not how we could work together to figure things out. I thought about protecting myself financially. Dr. Chen nodded. And what do you think that response tells us about the foundation of your relationship? Rebecca was quiet for a long moment. That I don't trust him to take care of me. Or, I said carefully, that you don't trust us to take care of each other. Explain the difference. Frank, taking care of her implies that she's my responsibility and I'm hers. Taking care of each other implies that we're a team working toward common goals. And which dynamic has characterized your marriage? Rebecca and I looked at each other across the small space between our chairs. 18 years of shared history, and we both knew the answer to that question. The first one, Rebecca said quietly. Almost exclusively, I agreed. Dr. Chen set down her pen. When did that pattern begin? Probably on our wedding day, I said, remembering the conversation we'd had about finances during our honeymoon. Rebecca had her trust fund. I had my salary. We agreed that she'd handle long-term investments and I'd handle day-to-day expenses. That sounds reasonable, Dr. Chen observed. It was reasonable, Rebecca said. But I think somewhere along the way, I started seeing Frank's job as his primary function in our marriage. And Frank, how did you respond to that dynamic? I thought about the consulting business I'd built in secret, the conversations I'd stopped trying to have, the gradual withdrawal from attempting to be a full partner in our life together. I enabled it. Instead of insisting that we be real partners, I just focused on fulfilling my assigned role. Why do you think you made that choice? Because it was easier than fighting about it every day, and because, Rebecca said softly, I made it very clear that I didn't want to hear about anything that complicated my comfortable routine. We talked for another 40 minutes about patterns and expectations and the difference between being married and being roommates who shared finances. By the time we left, I felt emotionally exhausted but also somehow hopeful. How do you feel about that session? I asked Rebecca as we walked to our cars. Terrified, she said honestly. But also relieved? Like maybe there's a way forward that doesn't involve us hating each other. There's definitely a way forward. The question is whether we both want to do the work it'll require. What kind of work? I thought about that question while we stood in the parking lot under fluorescent lights that made everything look harsh and unforgiving. Real conversation, real partnership, real vulnerability instead of polite coexistence. Rebecca nodded slowly. That sounds harder than splitting everything 50-50. Much harder, but probably more satisfying than what we've been doing. Definitely more satisfying. She looked at me with those blue eyes that had first caught my attention 20 years ago. Frank, are you willing to try? I'm willing to try. But I'm not willing to go back to what we had before. What do you mean? I mean, if we're going to rebuild this marriage, we build something new, something better, something based on who we actually are instead of who we thought we were supposed to be. Rebecca smiled for the first time in weeks. I'd like that. Good, because there's something I need to tell you. What? I already gave notice on Margaret's guest house. I was planning to find my own apartment this weekend. Rebecca's face fell. Oh, but if we're going to try this, really try, then I'm willing to come home. With conditions. What conditions? We sleep in the same bed, but we don't pretend everything is fine. We have real conversations about real things. We make decisions together instead of assuming the other person will just go along with whatever we want. And we both stop treating this marriage like a convenience and start treating it like a choice we make every day. Rebecca was quiet for a moment, then nodded. Those sound like reasonable conditions. They won't be easy. Nothing worth having ever is. As I followed her home that night, I found myself thinking about something Dr. Chen had said during our session. Most couples spend so much energy protecting themselves from their spouse that they forget why they wanted to be married in the first place. I'd forgotten a lot of things about Rebecca over the years. I'd forgotten that she used to ask me about my day and actually listen to the answers. I'd forgotten that she used to laugh at my stories about difficult clients. I'd forgotten that she used to plan little surprises just because she thought they'd make me smile. But I'd also forgotten things about myself. I'd forgotten that I used to enjoy sharing my successes with someone who cared about them. I'd forgotten that I used to plan romantic gestures just because I liked seeing her happy. I'd forgotten that I used to look forward to coming home at the end of the day. Maybe, if we were both willing to do the work, we could remember those people again. Or maybe we could discover entirely new versions of ourselves that were even better suited for each other. Either way, it had to be better than splitting everything 50-50. 3 weeks into counseling, Rebecca and I were having our first real fight in years. Not a polite disagreement or a passive-aggressive standoff, but an actual, honest-to-goodness argument about something that mattered. You can't just disappear for entire weekends without discussing it with me. Rebecca stood in our kitchen, her face flushed with genuine anger. I didn't disappear. I told you I was going fishing with Mike and his clients. It was a business trip. A business trip to a lake cabin in the mountains with no cell service? Sometimes business happens away from phones and computers, Rebecca. She crossed her arms and glared at me. And sometimes husbands use business trips as an excuse to avoid their wives. I stopped loading the dishwasher and turned to face her. Is that what you think I was doing? I don't know what you were doing, that's the point. So ask me. I am asking you. No, you're accusing me. There's a difference. Rebecca paused, taking a breath like Dr. Chen had taught us. You're right. Let me try again. She sat down at the kitchen island. Frank, I felt abandoned this weekend when you left for 2 days without much explanation. Can you help me understand what that trip meant to you? I sat down across from her, appreciating the effort she was making to communicate better. Mike has 3 new clients who needed help with major computer system overhauls. Instead of meeting in sterile conference rooms, he thought we could build better relationships by spending informal time together away from distractions, and that required 2 days. It required 2 days of showing them that we're the kind of partners who pay attention to their needs, not just their accounts. Rebecca nodded slowly. That makes sense, but Frank, I spent the weekend wondering if you were pulling away again. Again, like you did before. When you stopped talking to me about work, about your plans, about anything that mattered to you, I realized she was right. I had been pulling away, but not intentionally. The success of the consulting business, the satisfaction of working with Mike, the camaraderie with new clients, all of it felt so different from the life Rebecca and I had built together that I wasn't sure how to integrate them. I wasn't trying to pull away. But I also wasn't trying to include you. Why not? I thought about how to answer that honestly without being cruel, because I was afraid you wouldn't be interested. Based on what? Based on 18 years of experience. Rebecca flinched, but didn't get defensive. Fair enough, but Frank, I'm asking you to give me a chance to be different. How? Tell me about the weekend. Tell me about the clients, about the projects, about what you're building with Mike. Help me understand why it matters to you. So I did. I told her about Johnson Manufacturing and their antiquated inventory system, about Riverside Restaurant Group and their plan to expand into 3 new markets, about the satisfaction of solving complex problems with creative solutions, about feeling appreciated and challenged and genuinely excited about work for the first time in years. Rebecca listened, really listened, asked questions, made suggestions, showed interest in the details I'd assumed would bore her. You're really good at this, she said when I finished describing the technical challenges of integrating different software platforms. You sound surprised. I am surprised. Not that you're good at it, but that I never knew how good you are at it. Did you ever ask? No. She looked down at her hands. I don't think I ever asked you about anything you cared about. Rebecca, no, let me say this. I spent so many years treating your job like background noise that I forgot you had a whole professional life I knew nothing about. We were quiet for a moment, both recognizing the weight of that admission. I want to know, she said finally, about your work, about your plans, about what you're building. I want to be part of your life instead of just living adjacent to it. That's a big change. I know. It means you'll have to be interested in things that don't directly affect you. I know. And it means I'll have to be willing to share things with you again, even if I'm not sure you'll understand them. I know. I reached across the table and took her hand. So what does that look like practically? Well, you could start by telling me about next week's schedule. Are there any other business trips I should know about? Actually, yes, Mike and I are meeting with a potential new partner on Thursday, someone who wants to join the firm. Tell me about them. Her name is Janet Morrison. She's a CPA who specializes in nonprofit organizations. She's thinking about leaving her current firm because she wants more flexibility and creative control. Do you like her? From our phone conversations, yes. She seems smart and ambitious without being cutthroat. Mike thinks she'd be a good fit. Rebecca smiled. I'd like to meet her sometime. You would, Frank? If you're building something important, I want to know the people you're building it with. That was definitely a change. The old Rebecca had never expressed interest in meeting my colleagues beyond required social obligations. I'll ask Mike about having dinner sometime soon, all of us together. I'd like that. As we finished cleaning up the kitchen together, I found myself thinking about Dr. Chen's homework assignment from our last session. She'd asked us to identify one thing we wanted to change about our communication patterns and one thing we wanted to keep. Rebecca, can I ask you something? Of course. When we fight like we just did, how does it feel different from how we used to handle disagreements? She thought about that question. We actually said what we meant instead of dancing around it. And how did that feel? Scary, but also satisfying? Like we were finally addressing real issues instead of surface problems. That's what I want to keep, I said. The honesty. Even when it's uncomfortable. What do you want to change? I want to change my assumption that you won't be interested in my life. And I want to change your assumption that I don't want you to be interested. Deal. That night, for the first time since I'd moved back home, Rebecca and I talked until nearly midnight. About work. About plans. about things that mattered to us individually, and things we wanted to build together. It felt like the beginning of something new, something that might actually last. The dinner with Mike and Janet Morrison was scheduled for Friday evening at Carmine's, an Italian restaurant downtown that Mike claimed had the best lasagna in the city. Rebecca spent 20 minutes choosing an outfit, which was unusual for her but somehow endearing. "I want to make a good impression," she explained, holding up 2 different blouses. "You'll make a good impression by being yourself. That's what I'm afraid of." I looked at my wife standing in our bedroom in her slip, surrounded by clothes she'd tried on and discarded, genuinely nervous about meeting my business associates. When was the last time anything I did had mattered enough to her that she'd worried about making a good impression? Rebecca, Janet Morrison, has been running her own practice for 8 years while raising 2 teenagers as a single mother. Mike built his firm from nothing while putting himself through night school. These aren't people who judge based on appearances. Then what do they judge based on? Character, intelligence, whether you're the kind of person they'd enjoy working with. She looked at me in the mirror. "And you think I am?" "I think you're the kind of person who spent 15 minutes researching nonprofit accounting regulations this afternoon, just so you'd have intelligent questions to ask Janet about her work." Rebecca smiled. "I did do that. And I think you're the kind of person who called Mike's wife yesterday to ask if there was anything specific I should know about Janet's background before we meet. I wanted you to be prepared. And I think you're the kind of person who's been listening to me talk about work every night for 3 weeks and actually remembering the details." She turned around and looked at me directly. "Is that enough?" "It's everything." We arrived at Carmine's a few minutes early and found Mike already seated at a corner table, talking animatedly with a woman I assumed was Janet Morrison. She was smaller than I'd expected, maybe 5'4", with graying brown hair and laugh lines around her eyes. She wore a simple black dress and pearls, and she was laughing at something Mike had said. "Frank, Rebecca." Mike stood up and waved us over. Perfect timing. "Janet, this is my partner Frank Mitchell and his wife Rebecca." Janet stood to shake hands, and I immediately understood why Mike was excited about bringing her into the firm. She had the kind of presence that suggested competence without arrogance, warmth without familiarity. "Frank, it's wonderful to finally meet you in person. Mike has been telling me about your work with Johnson Manufacturing. That inventory system sounds like a fascinating challenge." "It is. Have you worked with manufacturing clients before?" "Not extensively, but I've handled inventory management for several food banks and distribution centers. The principles are similar, even if the scale is different." As we settled into our seats and ordered drinks, I watched Rebecca navigate the conversation with surprising skill. She asked Janet about her teenage kids, her decision to specialize in nonprofit work, her thoughts about work-life balance. Real questions that showed genuine interest. "Rebecca, Mike mentioned you're involved in fundraising?" Janet asked. "I volunteer with a few organizations, yes. Nothing too sophisticated, mostly event planning and donor relations. That's incredibly valuable work. Nonprofit organizations live or die based on their ability to build relationships with supporters." "Do you enjoy the financial side of nonprofit work?" Rebecca asked. "It seems like it would be challenging to make numbers work when you're not focused on profit." Janet's eyes lit up. "That's exactly what makes it interesting. You have to be creative about revenue streams, really strategic about resource allocation, and the impact measurement is completely different from traditional business metrics." I glanced at Mike, who was trying not to smile too obviously. Janet was clearly in her element talking about her specialty, and Rebecca was asking exactly the right questions to keep her engaged. Over dinner, the conversation flowed from business to family, to travel to books. Janet had recently returned from a volunteer trip to Guatemala, helping microfinance organizations improve their accounting systems. Rebecca had just finished reading a book about social entrepreneurship. Mike was planning a family reunion in Ireland for next summer. "Frank, Mike tells me you built your consulting business while working full-time at Blackstone," Janet said over dessert. "That takes incredible discipline." "It took ignoring my wife for 5 years," I said honestly. Janet looked surprised by my candor. "Frank's being modest," Rebecca said. "He built something remarkable while I was too self-absorbed to notice. I'm still learning about the scope of what he accomplished." "That's generous of you to say." "It's accurate." Rebecca met my eyes across the table. "I spent a lot of years taking my husband for granted. I'm trying to make up for lost time." The drive home was quiet but comfortable. "That went well," I said finally. "Did it?" I felt like I talked too much. You talked exactly the right amount. Janet liked you. How can you tell? She invited you to her daughter's art show next weekend. Rebecca smiled. I liked her too. She's smart and interesting, and she clearly respects what you and Mike are building. Does that matter to you? It matters to me that people see what I see when they look at you, which is someone worth knowing, someone worth working with, someone worth being married to. As we pulled into our driveway, Rebecca turned to me. Frank, can I ask you something? Of course. Tonight, when you introduced me to Janet, you said I was your wife. Not this is Rebecca, not meet my wife, Rebecca. You said this is my partner, Frank, and his wife, Rebecca. Did I? You did. And it made me realize that you're proud to be married to me, even after everything that's happened. I thought about that observation. Was I proud to be married to Rebecca? 3 months ago, I would have said our marriage was a polite convenience. But the woman who'd spent an hour researching nonprofit accounting because she wanted to have intelligent conversation with my colleagues, the woman who'd asked Mike's wife for background information so I'd be prepared for an important meeting, the woman who'd admitted her own mistakes in front of people she'd just met. Yes, I said. I am proud to be married to you, even though I almost destroyed us with my 50-50 nonsense, especially because you recognized it was nonsense and were willing to do the work to fix it. Rebecca reached over and took my hand. I love you, Frank Mitchell. It was the first time she'd said that in months. Not as a reflexive response to something I'd said, not as part of a greeting or goodbye routine, but as a spontaneous expression of genuine feeling. I love you too, Rebecca Mitchell, even when I'm being difficult, especially when you're being difficult. Difficult means you care enough to fight for something. As we walked into the house together, I realized something had shifted in the past few weeks. We weren't just trying to save our marriage anymore. We were building something new, something better than what we'd had before, something that might actually be worth fighting for. Monday morning, I was reviewing client files when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Frank Mitchell. Mr. Mitchell, this is Patricia Blackwell from Blackwell Sterling & Associates. We met briefly a few months ago, Rebecca's lawyer. The one who'd tried to intimidate me about living arrangements before learning we had no prenup. I remember. What can I do for you, Ms. Blackwell? I'm calling to inform you that Mrs. Mitchell has retained our services for a rather delicate matter. I set down my coffee and looked at my calendar. Rebecca was supposed to be at her book club until noon, but apparently she'd found time for legal consultation somewhere in her morning routine. What kind of delicate matter? I'd prefer to discuss this with you in person. Are you available this afternoon? Depends on what we're discussing. Your wife's financial assets and her desire to restructure certain arrangements. I almost laughed. After 6 weeks of counseling and genuine progress, Rebecca was still thinking about financial arrangements. Ms. Blackwell, I appreciate the call, but if Rebecca wants to discuss our financial situation, she can do it directly with me. Mr. Mitchell, I think you misunderstand. Mrs. Mitchell isn't seeking to protect her assets. She's seeking to share them. That stopped me cold. Excuse me? Perhaps we should meet, say 2 o'clock at my office? After I hung up, I stared at my phone for a full minute trying to process what Patricia Blackwell had just told me. Rebecca wanted to share her assets? The same Rebecca who demanded a 50-50 split of expenses when I lost my job? I called Mike and told him I needed to leave early for a personal matter. Everything okay with you and Rebecca? I honestly have no idea. Patricia Blackwell's office was exactly what you'd expect from a high-end family law firm. Mahogany furniture, leather-bound books, oil paintings of stern men in expensive suits. She gestured for me to sit in a chair that probably cost more than most people's cars. Mr. Mitchell, thank you for coming. Before we begin, I should mention that Mrs. Mitchell specifically requested that I explain everything to you in detail, with full disclosure of all relevant information. Okay. As you know, Mrs. Mitchell inherited a substantial trust fund when she turned 25. What you may not know is the current value of that inheritance. She slid a document across the desk. I looked at the number and felt my stomach drop. That's more than I expected. Significantly more, I imagine. The trust has been professionally managed for nearly 30 years, and your wife has been quite conservative in her withdrawals. Why are you showing me this? Patricia leaned back in her chair. Because Mrs. Mitchell wants to dissolve the trust and restructure her assets as joint marital property. She actually initiated this process about 3 weeks ago. Trust dissolution typically requires 60 days for all legal procedures to complete, but we're nearly finished with the paperwork. I read the sentence twice before it registered. All of it? All of it. She's also prepared to add your name to all investment accounts, property deeds, and business holdings. Why? According to Mrs. Mitchell, she realizes that your marriage has been fundamentally unequal from a financial standpoint, and she wants to correct that imbalance. I stared at the documents, trying to understand what Rebecca was thinking. Ms. Blackwell, what does this mean practically? It means that if something happened to Mrs. Mitchell, you would inherit everything without question. It means that if you divorce, you would be entitled to half of everything, regardless of who brought what into the marriage. It means you become equal partners in every sense. And what are the risks to Rebecca? Substantial. If you divorce, she loses half of her inherited wealth. If you develop financial problems, her assets could be at risk. If your business ventures fail, she shares in those losses. I set the papers down. This is insane. It's certainly generous. It's beyond generous. Why would she do this? Patricia smiled slightly. Perhaps you should ask her yourself. She's waiting in conference room B. She led me down a hallway to a smaller room where Rebecca sat at a polished table, wearing a navy blue dress and a nervous expression. Hi, she said softly. Hi, I sat down across from her. Rebecca, what the hell is this about? This is about me trying to fix the biggest mistake I've made in our marriage, which is keeping score, maintaining separate financial lives, treating you like a well-compensated employee instead of my partner. I looked at the documents Patricia had left on the table between us. You want to give me half of everything? I want us to own half of everything. Together. Do you understand what you're risking? Do you understand what I've been risking? Rebecca's voice was steady but emotional. Frank, for 18 years I've been so focused on protecting my financial security that I never invested in our emotional security. What does that mean? It means I never gave you a reason to stay married to me besides convenience. I thought about that statement. That's not true, isn't it? I had my money, you had your job, and we had our comfortable routine. But if you'd left me, what would I have lost? The house? The cars? My lifestyle? Your partner? Your friend? Your husband, but not my security. Not my independence. Not my ability to take care of myself. Rebecca leaned forward. I never made myself vulnerable to you, Frank. And without vulnerability, we didn't have a real marriage. And now I'm making myself completely vulnerable. If you leave me, I lose half of everything I've built my life around. If you stop loving me, I can't just retreat into my trust fund and pretend it doesn't matter. I stared at my wife across the conference table, understanding for the first time the magnitude of what she was offering. Not just money, but the security that money represented. The independence she'd guarded so carefully for 30 years. Rebecca, this is terrifying. Yes. And I started this process 3 weeks ago, right after our second counseling session. That's when I realized that all my talk about wanting to change meant nothing if I wasn't willing to risk something real. And if I say no, then we find another way to be equal partners. But Frank, I need you to know that I trust you with everything that matters to me, including your financial security. Especially my financial security. I thought about our conversation in counseling the previous week, when Dr. Chen had asked us to identify the fundamental issue underlying all our other problems. We'd both said the same thing. Equality, not just in decision-making or household responsibilities, but in vulnerability, in risk, in investment. What happens if I mess this up, I asked. What happens if I mess it up? We figure it out together. Rebecca smiled. Exactly. I reached across the table and took her hand. You realize this makes your 50-50 proposal look completely ridiculous in retrospect? I realized that my 50-50 proposal was the desperate attempt of someone who was terrified of being truly married. And now I'm terrified of not being truly married. Patricia Blackwell returned with a stack of papers that would require signatures, witnesses, and notarization. As Rebecca and I worked through each document, I found myself thinking about something Mike had said during our fishing trip. The best partnerships are the ones where both people have everything to lose. For 18 years, I'd been the only one with everything to lose. Now finally, we'd both be taking the same risks. It felt like the most romantic thing Rebecca had ever done for me. 6 months after Rebecca's 50-50 ultimatum, we were sitting in Dr. Chen's office for what would be our final counseling session. The woman across from me looked like the Rebecca I'd married 20 years ago. Engaged, present, genuinely happy, but also like someone entirely new. How do you both feel about the progress you've made? Dr. Chen asked. Amazed, Rebecca said. 6 months ago, I was convinced Frank was going to leave me, and I was preparing to protect myself from that possibility. Now I wake up every morning grateful that he chose to stay and not work on our marriage. Patricia Blackwell returned with a stack of papers that would require signatures. Rebecca had attended the grand opening of our expanded office space, asked intelligent questions about our new clients, and suggested a marketing strategy that Mike immediately wanted to implement. She'd also listened to me worry about whether Janet Morrison was happy with her decision to join our firm, offered to host a dinner party for our staff, and surprised me with tickets to a concert I'd mentioned wanting to attend. Rebecca is interested in my life now. Really interested. Not just politely interested. And that matters to you? It matters to me because it means she sees me as a whole person instead of just a husband. Doctor, Chen turned to Rebecca, how has your perspective on marriage changed? I used to think marriage was about finding someone who wouldn't interfere with the life I wanted to live. Now I think it's about finding someone whose life you want to be part of. And what does being part of Frank's life look like practically? Rebecca smiled. It looks like learning enough about business to understand why he gets excited about solving complex problems. It looks like meeting his clients and colleagues and actually caring about the relationships he's building. It looks like planning our future together instead of planning my future with Frank as a supporting character. Frank, how do you experience that change? I feel like I have a partner instead of a dependent. Explain the difference. A dependent needs me to fulfill a specific function, pay bills, fix things, handle unpleasant tasks. A partner chooses to build something with me that neither of us could build alone. Dr. Chen made a note. Both of you have mentioned feeling chosen by the other person. That's significant language. It is significant, Rebecca said. Frank chooses to stay married to me even though he could leave and take half of everything I own. That makes every day feel like he's choosing me fresh. And Rebecca chooses to share her financial security with me, even though she could keep it separate and maintain her independence. I added, that makes me feel trusted in a way I've never experienced before. What have you learned about yourselves through this process? I considered that question. What had I learned about myself? That I'd been settling for a marriage that met my basic needs while ignoring my deeper desires for connection, partnership, and genuine intimacy. That I was capable of building something significant in business because I'd been denying myself the satisfaction of building something significant in my personal life. I learned that I'm happier when I'm fully invested in something, whether it's work or marriage. Half-hearted commitment leads to half-hearted results. And Rebecca, I learned that I'm braver than I thought I was, and more capable of change than I gave myself credit for. What do you mean by braver? Making myself financially vulnerable to Frank felt like the most frightening thing I could imagine 6 months ago, but it also felt like the most honest thing I'd ever done in our marriage. Dr. Chen looked at both of us. What are your goals for your marriage going forward? To keep growing, Rebecca said immediately. Not to get comfortable and slip back into old patterns. How will you prevent that? Regular check-ins, continued conversation about what we're building together, and probably occasional counseling sessions when we hit rough patches. Frank, I want to make sure we maintain the balance we've found between individual growth and partnership. Rebecca has her interests, I have mine, and we also have shared goals and dreams, such as... Rebecca and I looked at each other and smiled. We'd been talking about this for weeks. Travel, Rebecca said. Frank has wanted to take me to Europe for years, and I've always found reasons to postpone it. We're planning 3 weeks in Italy next spring, and Rebecca has always been interested in photography, I added. We're setting up a darkroom in the basement so she can develop her own prints. A darkroom? Film photography, Rebecca explained. Digital is convenient, but there's something satisfying about the physical process of creating an image from start to finish. Like building a business, I said, or rebuilding a marriage. Dr. Chen closed her notepad and smiled at us. I think you're ready to graduate. As we walked to our cars after the session, Rebecca took my arm. Frank, can I ask you something? Always. Do you ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't demanded the 50-50 split? I considered that question while we stood in the parking lot of the medical building where we'd spent so many Tuesday evenings learning how to be married to each other. We probably would have continued being politely miserable for another 10 years. Really? Your 50-50 ultimatum was the best thing that happened to our marriage. How do you figure? Because it forced both of us to stop pretending we were happy with something that wasn't working. Rebecca laughed. So my moment of complete selfishness accidentally saved our marriage? Your moment of honesty saved our marriage. The selfishness was just the delivery method. As I followed Rebecca home, to our home, with our shared mortgage and our joint bank accounts and our plans for the future, I thought about the conversation that had started this whole journey. From now on, we split everything 50-50. She'd been right, just not in the way she'd intended. We did split everything 50-50 now. The vulnerabilities, the risks, the rewards, the work of building something together that was stronger than what either of us could build alone. The only difference was that 50-50 turned out to mean partnership instead of separation. And partnership, I was discovering, was infinitely better than keeping score. That evening, as Rebecca and I planned our upcoming dinner party for the firm and discussed her photography project and reviewed travel brochures for Italy, I realized something that would have seemed impossible 6 months ago. I was completely, genuinely happy to be married to her. Not settling, not making the best of a difficult situation, not staying for practical reasons. Happy, excited about our future, grateful for our present. Rebecca looked up from the Italy guidebook she was reading and caught me staring at her. What are you thinking about? I'm thinking about how much I love being married to you. She smiled and reached for my hand. I love being married to you too, even when I leave coffee cups around the house, even when you leave coffee cups around the house, even when I talk too much about work, especially when you talk about work. I like knowing what you're passionate about. I leaned over and kissed my wife. Not a polite marital obligation kiss, but a real kiss from someone who was genuinely happy to be exactly where he was. Where are you watching from today? I asked, grinning at her confused expression. What? Nothing. Inside joke. As we settled in for the evening, reading travel guides and making lists and planning our shared future, I couldn't help but think about anyone out there who might be watching this story unfold and recognizing themselves in our struggle. If your marriage feels more like a financial arrangement than a partnership, there's hope. If you've been keeping score instead of building something together, you can change course. If you've been protecting yourself from your spouse instead of trusting them with your vulnerability, it's not too late to choose differently. Rebecca and I almost destroyed our marriage by trying to make it fair instead of making it real. The best decision we ever made was choosing to split everything 50-50. We just had to figure out what that actually meant. Thanks for watching our story unfold. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to rebuild trust in your marriage? What did that process look like for you? And remember, sometimes the most dangerous words in a marriage aren't "I want a divorce." Sometimes they're "that's fine," when it really isn't. Until next time, choose partnership over scorekeeping. It makes all the difference.